Welcome to Colonie TV, the governmental educational channel for the town of Colonie.
Hello, I'm Colonie Town Judge Peter Crummey, and welcome to Benchmark. We'll explore a variety of issues involving our justice system, our legal system, and how they relate to the citizens of the town of Colonie. Today, we are truly fortunate to have as our guest Colonie Town resident and attorney, James Featherstonhaugh. During the past 45 years, Mr. Featherstonhaugh has practiced in a variety of settings and maintains a practice of law currently in Albany, Featherstone, Wiley, and Klein. And welcome, Jim. Thank you for coming today.
Thanks for having me, Peter. It's good to be here.
Well, there's no question that the half hour that we're afforded today cannot do justice to the length and breadth of your professional activity in and around the capital region and the state of New York. And I know that I enjoy the fact that in your early days as an attorney, you too were a town justice.
I was. I graduated from law school in 1969, was admitted that same year, which probably surprises young lawyers now. There wasn't the big time gap. I was almost immediately made the town attorney for the town of Duanesburg, literally within a year or so. The reason for that was at the time, there were only two attorneys living in Duanesburg. The other one, Ed O'Connor, who had been briefly town attorney, was a Democrat, and since the Republicans controlled the town board in Duanesburg at that time, and I was the only attorney, I became the town attorney. That worked interestingly for me because the town board was made up of the two town judges, two councilmen, the supervisor. One of those judges was an 82-year-old man who lived in the Mariahville area, and one day in a terrible winter like we have now, he went up on his roof to shovel the snow off it. Unfortunately, shoveled himself off it with the snow, leading to his untimely demise. The remaining members of the town board thought it would be a good idea to consult the town attorney on who they might appoint as judge, and I pointed out to them that it's not a bad thing for a judge to have a legal education. Maybe they should consider me, and they happily did that, which is how I became. At the time, I think briefly I was the youngest town judge in the state of New York.
Well, the modesty that you bring to your practice today is certainly the same type of modesty that you're sharing about your early days as a town judge. Certainly it was your capacity as well, and the faith in the local town board to know that you could do that job for them and distinguish the town in that way. And everything you've done since then has also distinguished not only the practice of law in the entire capital region and in the state of New York, but you've been involved in so many different types of activities involving the practice, and not only serving 7 years as Duanesburg town judge, but in fact, your family history is well rooted in the practice of law and its impact on the practice of law throughout the state of New York, and even an ancestor of yours, a direct ancestor, I don't know how many greats, but a great-great-grandfather served as the first federal judge to sit in the United States of America. Is that correct?
That is correct. That would be James Duane, hence the name Duanesburg. He basically owned the town back in the late 1700s. But Duane was the first mayor of New York City after the Constitution was adopted. And in that position, one day when he was presiding over a city council meeting, Alexander Hamilton and John Jay came to the council meeting, asked the mayor if he would step outside. He did that. They told him that they had been with President Washington, and President Washington proposed to nominate him to a federal judgeship. Would he consider accepting it? The reason I know that, by the way, is not because I was there, although I have practiced for a long time, but is because I have a copy of a letter that Duane wrote to his wife, who was on a ship somewhere, explaining to her how he had to make this life-altering decision. He wished he could discuss it with her, but the president was asking for an immediate answer. And so he described weighing the job of mayor of New York City versus the job of being the first federal judge. And he indicated they were both honorable offices, but as he thought of it, having to deal with the inconsequential matters that were constantly brought before him by the city council members, he felt made the judgeship the more dignified and certainly the more satisfying position. I suspect if he isn't doing it now, that shortly Mayor de Blasio will share his views.
Well, that letter and, of course, that entire relationship from your family on a direct line it has had a dramatic impact on the practice of law and the judiciary for many centuries now in that way. And in fact, the federal court now also wants to recognize that significance. And isn't there an event coming up soon that recognizes that? And aren't you a major part of that recognition?
I don't know if I'm a major part of the recognition, but there is an event coming up. The Federal Bar Association for the Northern District is going to honor James Duane as the first judge, and also legitimately lay claim to the title of being the mother court, if you will, from which all precedent in the United States descends. They're going to have a ceremony on June 5th. Duane is actually buried in the Capital Region. He is entombed in a crypt beneath Christ Church, Duanesburg. It's on Route 20, which itself is the oldest unaltered Episcopal church in the state of New York. Unaltered meaning it's not altar-centered. It's built just the way it was constructed back in the 1790s. Wow. And he is buried beneath that, and his tombstone is on the wall of that, along with some of the other members of his family.
Well, your practice over the past 45 years has marked the evolution of law practice throughout the Capital Region. After Albany Law School, you began work with DeGraff Foy down at 90 State Street, which certainly was probably the most significant law practice at the time in downtown Albany.
I think it actually, at the time I went there, was probably the most significant law practice between Manhattan, maybe Westchester, and Syracuse. It was a major force in the area. The two gentlemen, the founders, George Foy and John DeGraff Sr., were giants in the industry. They did different things, but it was a great firm, had a whole history of brilliant men that worked there, and I was fortunate to get a job there.
Well, they were lucky to have you as well. And, I keep trying to parallel my life with yours and saying, gee, I'm a town judge, and gee, I was an intern at DeGraff Foy, recognizing that I could never attain the level of practice that you have and continue to do today in a variety of ways. Because after being involved with DeGraff Foy, which was the cutting-edge firm, as you said, between Westchester and Syracuse, you then moved out into your own practice and ultimately then creating, at the time, the largest law firm in downtown Albany. Is that correct?
All of that's true. I think I just had ADHD before anybody knew how to diagnose it. So I was interested in a lot of different areas of the practice, and I was always kind of restless. I left DeGraff Foy to go form a firm with a friend of mine who was also a judge, Bruce Martin, of the Martin, Harding, and Mazzotti heavy hitters firm. At the time, Harding and Mazzotti were not yet lawyers when Bruce and I started, but
Right.
Bruce had been retained to defend a man accused of murder, and he had left the DA's office. He asked me if I wanted to join him. At the time, I thought, wow, I've been a lawyer for 4 years, and I'm going to get to play a role in a murder case. That's great. So we started, and then from there, I went to Romer and Featherstonhaugh. Jim Romer had also worked at DeGraff, and the Civil Service Employees Association wanted to hire a new firm, actually to replace DeGraff at the time. That had essentially to do with internal politics, not with the quality of the work anyone was doing. So I went with him. We actually stayed with CSA, representing them as our flagship client for about 10 years. When they left, 40% of the business walked out the door. And it was after that that we then built the biggest law firm in the Capital District for some time. We had offices in Manhattan and Syracuse and Beverly Hills, oddly enough. So
Well,
that whole period of time was a lot of fun for a young man.
Well, it's part of it. It's due to the industry and the way that you've presented yourself throughout, not only on behalf of your clients who have enjoyed your representation, but also the industry to want to help others and help young attorneys get positions and to flourish themselves as a role model for them, which you've done and continue to do today. You've had a variety of very large celebrated cases. One involved a case with the federal government, maybe in the late 80s or so, when ultimately you were able to register what was then the largest verdict that had been received in the area, I believe a $7 million verdict back in the late 80s or so. Tell us about that case.
You know, that was a fascinating case. It took a full decade of work to get it, bring it to conclusion. I would advise all young attorneys, if you're going to get into litigation with the federal government, do it when you're very young, because you won't be young when it's over. The case involved a man who worked at the Griffin Laboratory, which is over in Guilderland and is run by the state of New York, who came down with rabies. Now, he worked in a laboratory that was filled with rabid animals because they were studying rabies there. And what they were trying to do was learn how to inoculate wildlife against rabies by putting a rabies virus on a little pill, if you will. Then they'd put the pill in a piece of bait. And their plan was to go around the country throwing little pieces of hamburgers out of airplanes in the hopes that raccoons and foxes would eat them and then not be able to catch rabies. Unfortunately, the heat in the process kept killing the rabies virus. So a man at the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta said, well, I'll just build a stronger virus. And he kept passaging the virus until he had, the Godzilla of viruses. Put it in a little vial, got on a U.S. airplane, flew it to Albany in his pocket, took it up to the lab, put it into a machine, they sprayed it, and the lab worker, Mr. Androlonis, was sitting in the spray. Now, we couldn't prove that he got the virus because of that by any direct evidence. Viruses are invisible and you couldn't see it. But we eventually went back, found the virus had been harvested in the streets of Suffern, Alabama in 1936 it was. And followed that virus through its passages in the records the scientists kept all the way to Guilderland and unfortunately into Mr. Androlanos. We tried that case for a month. I might have been even 5 weeks. Started with a jury. As various defendants settled, it finally came down to just the federal government and the state government, so the jury was released. Judge Howard Munson, 2 years, I think, after the trial, finally handed down a 320 or 30-page decision. The federal government wasn't through yet. It appealed it to the Second Circuit. It sought certiorari from the Supreme Court of the United States. It was denied. Another law dealing with something was passed, and they sought review by the Supreme Court again, and it was denied. So it was a full 10 years before the case was finally resolved. But fascinating case.
Well, it shows your determination to stick with it and move it forward and recognize the time that it takes when your adversary is a government. That's not easy to do. But it also highlights your distinguished civil practice, which you currently continue. But you're also well known as well for your government relations practice as well. And you've not only been involved in representing interests in and around the state legislature, but you've also had some litigation involving cases in and around agencies of the state government as well. And I know that just a handful of years ago, you were involved in a case with the then State Lobbying Commission, which certainly got a lot of attention as well. And I think that you were successful in being able to convince the court that actually a section of the law that they were relying on, that the Lobbying Commission was relying on, actually was unconstitutional.
I did get to do that. Once again, the best part of the practice of law, as you know well, is the people you meet.
Right.
So I got a phone call one day from Russell Simmons, who is the hip-hop music mogul, and actually he's kind of a general mogul. Mr. Simmons is a fascinating man. He had gotten subpoenaed by the Lobbying Commission, which at the time was being headed up by David Grandow, and they were insisting that Mr. Simmons needed to register as a lobbyist in New York, and he hadn't done so. He retained me. Mr. Simmons was, actually both he and Mr. Grandow were quite colorful in the press in some of their exchanges with one another. But putting that aside, he raised a very legitimate point. He said, I'm a citizen, I'm entitled to a point of view, and I'm entitled to express that point of view, whether there's legislation pending or not pending. I have a point of view. Mr. Grandow thought that under the statute as it existed at that time, the nature of his expression would have made him subject to the lobbying law. So we did bring an action seeking to have the law declared unconstitutional. We brought it in front of one of your former guests, Justice Bud Malone, and eventually the justice declared the law unconstitutional, and that was held up on appeal.
Well, and of course, that's not only statewide news, as it was at the time, but has had a dramatic impact on how that lobbying commission had to modify the way it looked at
there were some statutory changes that flew out of that, and some other big changes in how they conducted their hearings and a lot of other things.
Well, it only goes to show that your effort as an attorney representing a client has had an impact on the practice of law, and that's just one of the many times in which your efforts have done just that. I know that routinely you're involved in representing interests before the state legislature and the executive as well, and in a very extensive governmental relations practice that you maintain and continue to move forward with. You've also been, you told us that many years ago you were also working with CSEA and other entities that were involved with state government at that time too. So you've had a wide portal seeing how governmental relations and the practice of such as over a wide period of time. Have you seen the practice of governmental relations change over that time?
It's changed dramatically, Peter. When I started, and some of this you do know because you worked in the state senate and you've been involved in politics over the years, but when I started back in the early 70s, governmental relations was very informal. There were only a few firms that really did it to any extent, but the whole nature of public campaigns was different, and the nature of there was no oversight at all of it. So it was not unusual to have lobbyists, myself included. At that time, you could take legislators to dinner, you could buy their dinner, or they could buy yours, whatever you all wanted to do. There was much less partisanship in the government, so it was not only not unusual, it was usual to have Democrats and Republicans out together. Divisions were more geographic than party divisions. You know, the people from Queens liked to go out together. The people from Syracuse liked to go out together because they had common interests, regardless of what party they came. And lobbying or governmental relations in those days was carried on throughout a social-like setting. Now, there have been all kinds of laws, starting with the Lobbying Commission, that have been put in place where, you know, lobbyists can't buy dinners for legislators. Right. I would point out that they can still buy dinners for us, so if any of the legislators out there want to take me to dinner tonight, I'm happy to have them. So it's become more formal, less, and people have stepped away. The other big change that's happened is the kind of merger of the kind of door-to-door bread and butter lobbying with public relations and big public campaigns. You can, in any legislative session, I can give you one, this last legislative session, if anybody had any interest in the budgetary proposals for campaign finance, you would have seen, and we all see them all in the Albany, Colonie area, television ads, 30-second television ads that ran constantly saying why it was a good idea and call the governor and tell him stand up for this and call your legislator. And those ads didn't just run here. They ran in a variety of media markets. And that kind of public campaigns put together by firms, very good firms, that also have grass chops and grassroots organizations that generate letters from, you know, ordinary people living in neighborhoods to their legislators. The use now of social media, all of that has blended. What is interesting in the practice of law, that industry is still very much unregulated. It's regulated to some extent by JCOPE, and there are some rules. But if you're a lawyer, what you have to remember is that the position of the Bar Association, I think its correct position is, that when you're a lawyer all the time. And when the fact that you're lobbying instead of being in court, you're still a lawyer, you're still ethically bound by our code of ethics. You still have to abide by all the conflict rules, by the lawyer-client confidentiality rules. Folks who are in this business, because you don't have to be a lawyer to be a lobbyist, and certainly not to be a part, they play on a different field without those rules.
Right. Right.
So all of that's changing. I think the campaign finance issue, which I don't expect to go away, particularly in light of the recent Supreme Court decision, I think that'll just raise the issue to a fever pitch. But depending on how that eventually resolves itself, and I'm not sure how that will be, that I think will either accelerate or certainly continue the push to have governmental relations lobbying be a broader, more grassroots campaign style effort as opposed to the simple personal relationship effort.
Well, the Supreme Court case that you're referring to, the McCutcheon case, where the decision just came out last week, it seems to me that the way the federal system was set up is that donors were limited on the amount of money they could give to one individual, and they were also limited to the total number of individuals they could give to. And I believe the Supreme Court struck that second piece and said you can't limit it by numbers of you should be able, your freedom of speech might allow you to support 100 people. Does New York State, its current laws for advancing campaign contributions, is it tracked the same way as the federal? Does it have a cap by individual?
It has a very similar provision, which I think now is in real question. Nobody's challenged it in New York yet.
Right.
But New York does have a cap, and it's an individual. I don't remember exactly what it is, but it's not too dissimilar from the federal cap. It's $140,000 or $50,000. That's the limit that you as an individual can contribute. And then, of course, there are limitations on particular offices. So if you are a real enthusiast and believe in whatever you might believe in and think that I want to support somebody in all 63 Senate districts, today you wouldn't be able to do it and fit within the cap.
Exactly.
That's very much the same question that was put federally. So we may see some action in New York on that front.
Well, I'm sure that we will, and we will also see a lot more of Jim Featherstonhaugh in and around our community, positively impacting the entire capital region and the state of New York. Jim, we've talked about our children. They're also very important to you and I. I have 5, and you have some fabulous young men in your family. What are they up to today? What's happening with your guys?
I'm happy to say, because we're here in the Colonie Library, that the many nights I spent in this library with the 2 boys,
that's right,
working on their homework and other things, has actually seems to have paid off. My son Thomas is a freshman at Hobart College, where he's doing very well.
And that's where you went.
Yep, that's where I went. Go Statesman. I'm very proud of him. And my older son, George, who graduated from Siena, right here in the heart of Colonie.
Right.
And the current reigning CBI champion.
That's right.
I think.
Congratulations.
So go Saints. He graduated this winter, and he had just been accepted to and started a Union Graduate College, where he's going to pursue an MBA. And he, counting me at Albany Law School, which is part of Union University,
that's right,
as is the Graduate College, he will be the 6th generation of my family that has attended Union one way or the other in one of its guises, and he's given me something to root for on Thursday at the Frozen Four, where I believe Union College is going to soundly spank your alma mater.
We shall see. 5 o'clock tomorrow, and the Frozen Four as Boston College and Union face off. It will be a super event for both of them, and it only goes to show that that there's so many great things are happening, and what a relationship that your family's had with Union, as well as certainly is also a symbol of community pride for us here in the Capital Region. Siena College, Union College, U Albany, where I have a daughter. There's so many. I think you suggested to me at one point we might have 17.
I believe there are colleges of one type or another, and I can't name all 17 without a piece of paper, but I mean, we're proud of all of them. RPI is,
Yes, we are.
a jewel. And don't forget Hudson Valley Community College, Schenectady
Exactly.
Community College, that whole community college system, and our college group together, I think, is the sustaining force for the new technology developments we see in this capital area. We can provide a workforce to support the companies that are coming here. And it's a great thing for the Capital District.
Well, and so are you. We, from so many different ways. Albany Law School is so proud of you, and the Albany County Bar Association is so proud of you and your impact, and our town of Colonie is so pleased and fortunate to call you our own. And thank you for joining us today.
And I'm happy to be here, and I'd just like to say for Colonie, you know, we moved out of Duanesburg when our children came along because we thought this was the town where we wanted to raise our kids. It was a great decision. I'm glad we made it.
Well, we're thrilled that you have, and that we look forward to following you as you move forward and continuing to evolve the practice of law here in the Capital Region for all of our benefit. And thank you, Jim.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Colonie Town Judge Peter Crummey, and thank you for joining me on Benchmark.